Howdy readers, I'm Jason, this is Chapter and Verse, and this is my final video on Hilary Mantel's Wolf Hall, which we have been reading throughout January and are finishing this weekend as the first third of Cromwellathon here on BookTube, which is a read-along of the Thomas Cromwell trilogy by Hilary Mantel that I'm hosting. In February, we're reading Bring Up the Bodies, and in March, the third book in the trilogy, The Mirror and the Light, is being published. So the chapters that I'm going to cover in this video are Devil's Spit, A Painter's Eye, Supremacy, The Map of Christendom, and To Wolf Hall. Now, I'll just be honest and let you guys know that I'm actually still finishing the book. This is my third read of the book, so I can speak to the ending a little bit. But yeah, I'm in the Map of Christendom at the moment, and I expect to finish the book tonight or tomorrow at some point. So, that said, there are three things really that I wanted to talk about in this video. Now, the first thing harkens back to the chapter of, what was it called, An Occult History of Britain, and that story that Cardinal Wolsey tells Cromwell about all of the kind of, murky, folkloric kind of underbelly of British history and recent history and further back as well. And I just really loved that tale. I loved that chapter. And in the reading for this weekend, I saw two other really striking passages that were concerned with the strata beneath a country's or a city's present day, right? What lies beneath it? What is that present day constructed upon? And to what extent are the ghosts of the past, right, of place and of people who've come before, knitted up with the lives in any present as it's being lived out? And I wanted to read these passages not just because they speak to this idea of a kind of subterranean bedrock on which present days are constructed, are built, but also just because they're really, really beautiful. But in these same streets, Chapuis sees the stirrings of sedition, a city ready to open its gates to the emperor. He was not at the sack of Rome, but there are nights when he dreams of it as if he had been there. The black guts spilled on antique pavements, the half-dead draped in the fountains, the chiming of bells through the marsh fog, and the flames of arsonist torches leaping along the walls. Rome has fallen, and everything within it. It was not invaders, but Pope Julius himself who knocked down old St. Peter's, which had stood for 1,200 years, the site where the Emperor Constantine himself had dug the first trench, 12 scoops of soil, one for each of the apostles, where the Christian martyrs sewn into the skins of wild beasts had been torn apart by dogs. 25 feet he dug down to lay his new foundations through a necropolis, through 12 centuries of fish bones and ash, his workmen's shovels powdering the skulls of saints. In the place where martyrs had bled, ghost-white boulders stood, marble, waiting for Michelangelo. And the second passage along these lines that I wanted to read to you guys comes right near the end of the chapter Supremacy. And it goes like this. Walter would chase him and hit him if he could catch him. There's a bloody rebel song for you. We know what to do with rebels here. They are dug into shallow graves, the Cornishmen who came up the country when he was a boy. But there are always more Cornishmen. And beneath Cornwall, beyond and beneath this whole realm of England, beneath the sodden marches of Wales and the rough territory of the Scots border, there is another landscape. There is a buried empire, where he fears his commissioners cannot reach. Who will swear the Hobbs and Boggarts who live in the hedges and in hollow trees, and the wild men who hide in the woods? Who will swear the saints in their niches, and the spirits that cluster at holy wells rustling like fallen leaves, and the miscarried infants dug into unconsecrated ground, all those unseen dead who hover in winter around forges and village hearths, trying to warm their bare bones? For they, too, are his countrymen. the generations of the uncounted dead, breathing through the living, stealing the light from them, the bloodless ghosts of lord and knave, nun and whore, the ghosts of priest and friar who feed on living England and suck the substance from the future. And this acknowledgement of what once was fascinates me, partly because of the novel's simultaneous obsession with forward momentum. Now, the next thing I wanted to talk about is something that Joe Smith asked me to discuss, and that is the title of the book and its possible meanings. And the first possible meaning that I wanted to address plays into this obsession with momentum, in that it indicates where the narrative is going, right? So, To Wolf Hall is the final chapter of the book. Wolf Hall are the final words of the book. But as we know, it's the Seymour home, right? It's the Seymour household, and we know where this story is going, right? The characters themselves don't, but we know where this story is going. And calling the book Wolf Hall reminds us that despite the fact that so much of the book is focused on the Boleyns, on Anne becoming queen, on Anne producing an heir, and calling the novel Wolf Hall seems to be Hilary Mantel's way, one of Hilary Mantel's ways of reminding us that the story doesn't end here. It doesn't end with the Boleyns. So the fact that throughout the book she's looking back at British history and at the folklore and the myth, the legend, the fairy stories even of British history, she's reminding us that the present that we're reading is built on this past, even as we're always looking ahead toward the future, even with the title of the book. And the second possible meaning has to do with this being a novel about relationships, right? So what relationships are sacramental? What makes them so? What relationships are taboo? What qualifies as incest? What qualifies as marriage? And Wolf Hall, the Seymour home, right, the Seymour household, with its scandal of incest, is the paradigm to determine what is and is not ethical with respect to relationships. If the characters in the book would stop debating these points long enough to just look at it, right, to just see. But of course, they don't do that. And then the third meaning suggests Wolf Hall as a kind of metaphor, I feel like, for Henry's court. That as lofty as it is, how different is it really from the scandalous environs of the Seymour home? And then also Wolf Hall just as a kind of den of viciousness, right? In the same way that we would use the phrase nest of vipers. To what extent is Henry's court an uncivilized and brutal and duplicitous place? A hall of wolves, right? It reminds me of that part when Christophe, right, the young French boy who is a kind of ruffian that Cromwell had brought over from Calais, he hears a sound in the night, and he asks, are there wolves? Is that a wolf? And Cromwell says something to the effect of, there have been no wolves in England for centuries now. And the irony of that, because the book seems to be full of wolfish figures, right, of wolves in human clothing, so to speak. And then the last thing I wanted to address, which also kind of feeds into this whole looking ahead, the way Hilary Mantel is always looking forward in the book, even as she's looking back, is the way that we know the outcomes of the characters' stories, and that the characters themselves can't possibly know the outcomes. And I was struck by this passage right near the beginning of this week's reading, right near the beginning of the chapter Devil's Spit. So Elizabeth has been born, and we have Cranmer saying this: the queen is strong, and her family are fertile. You can get another child soon, and perhaps God intends some peculiar blessing by this princess. And I love that because they have no idea just what a blessing God intends by Princess Elizabeth. She, as we know, she will go on to become arguably the most famous English monarch in history, the most revered, the most iconic English monarch in history. Her name will become an adjective, right? Her reign will become synonymous with Shakespeare, with the body of work that is going to become the standard bearer, right? The high watermark of all literature in the English-speaking world for centuries afterward. In this book, I mean, she's just a little tiny, she's just a little infant. She's a little toddler with red hair, and she can't even speak yet. And we know so much more about just what kind of blessing she will be to England than any of the characters can possibly suspect, which I just find really fascinating. I'm actually going to rewatch Elizabeth Shekhar Kapoor's film with Kate Blanchett tonight. My friend Dan and I are going to smoke the toad and watch Elizabeth on the big screen while the rest of America is watching the Super Bowl. So anyway, those are my final thoughts on Wolf Hall, having not finished the last 60 pages or so. So for next week in Bring Up the Bodies, right, here's the American hardcover of it, we will be reading the chapters Falcons and Crows. And yeah, I can't wait to continue this journey with all of you. And I'm really excited too that we're going to have more people joining us than had joined us for Wolf Hall, because there were a number of people who read Wolf Hall a couple months ago, 3 months ago, or what have you, and who hadn't read Bring Up the Bodies yet, and so didn't join us in January, but planned to join us in February. And then we'll probably even have a lot more people joining us in March for the third book, because we'll have a lot of people who didn't reread the first two with us, but nobody's read the third book yet. And so, yeah, I'm excited to see where this goes. But anyway, I hope you guys are doing well. If you are in the West, like I am, and this massive snowstorm is going to be hitting you, please stay safe, stay warm, go to the store today and get all the stuff that you're going to need, just in case you're socked in, and I will see you guys again very soon. Adios.